Is visceral fat behind your health issues? Visceral fat is the type of fat that surrounds internal organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which is the fat stored just beneath the skin, visceral fat is deeply embedded within the abdominal cavity and can pose serious health risks. And unless you are an Olympic sprinter, you will have some visceral fat. In fact, you can be thin and have a lot of visceral fat. Here's some of the dangers and negative effects of visceral fat. You may be shocked. I certainly was. Heart disease. Visceral fat is strongly linked to an increased risk of arteriosclerosis, which is plaque buildup in the arteries, and coronary artery disease. High blood pressure. Excess visceral fat contributes to the development of hypertension. Chronic high blood pressure further increases the risk of heart attack and stroke. Abnormal cholesterol levels. Visceral fat can increase LDL, or bad cholesterol, and decrease HDL, or good cholesterol, further raising the risk of heart disease and stroke. Insulin resistance. Visceral fat plays a key role in the development of insulin resistance, a condition in which the body's cells become less responsive to insulin. This leads to higher levels of insulin in the blood, which can ultimately result in type 2 diabetes. Metabolic syndrome. Visceral fat is a central component of metabolic syndrome, a cluster of risk factors that includes high blood pressure, high blood sugar, elevated cholesterol, and abdominal obesity. People with metabolic syndrome are at greater risk for developing heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. Visceral fat is closely linked to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a condition in which fat accumulates in the liver without alcohol consumption. This can progress to more serious liver conditions, including cirrhosis and liver failure. Visceral fat can also contribute to liver inflammation and fibrosis, which can disrupt liver function and lead to scarring and permanent damage over time. Visceral fat is highly active metabolically and increases inflammation. This chronic low-grade inflammation can damage tissues and contribute to the development of a variety of diseases, including heart disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative conditions. The inflammation from visceral fat can spread throughout the body, impairing immune function and increasing the risk of conditions like arthritis, asthma, and autoimmune diseases. Visceral fat is associated with an increased risk of developing several types of cancer, including breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, and endometrial cancer. Excess visceral fat can increase the production of certain hormones like estrogen and insulin, both of which can contribute to the development of hormone-sensitive cancers, such as breast and endometrial cancer. Visceral fat can contribute to the development of obstructive sleep apnea, a condition where the airway becomes blocked during sleep, leading to periods of interrupted breathing. Sleep apnea is linked to an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. Excess visceral fat can also reduce lung capacity and make breathing more difficult, particularly during physical activity. Excess visceral fat is associated with an increased risk of osteoarthritis, a degenerative joint disease, due to the added pressure on weight-bearing joints, especially the knees and hips. Inflammation from visceral fat also contributes to cartilage breakdown and joint pain. The presence of visceral fat, especially when combined with subcutaneous fat, can impair physical mobility, making it more difficult to engage in regular physical activity, which in turn exacerbates health problems related to obesity. Chronic inflammation caused by visceral fat has been linked to a higher risk of cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. The inflammatory markers released by visceral fat can negatively affect brain function and interfere with cognitive performance. Visceral fat is also linked to a higher risk of mood disorders like depression and anxiety, possibly due to the inflammatory effects on the brain and the disruption of hormones involved in mood regulation, like serotonin. Hormonal imbalances. Visceral fat is known to interfere with the hormone leptin, which regulates hunger and energy balance. People with excessive visceral fat often develop leptin resistance, leading to increased appetite and overeating. In women, excess visceral fat can disrupt the balance of sex hormones like estrogen, which may lead to irregular menstrual cycles, increased risk of infertility, and other hormonal issues. Visceral fat can contribute to the development of chronic kidney disease due to its effects on blood pressure and insulin resistance, both of which are key risk factors for kidney damage. High levels of visceral fat are associated with impaired kidney function and an increased risk of kidney failure. Both men and women with excess visceral fat may experience sexual dysfunction. In men, it is often linked to erectile dysfunction due to reduced blood flow and hormonal imbalances. In women, excess visceral fat may contribute to reduced libido and other sexual health issues. Pregnancy complications. There is an increased risk of gestational diabetes, higher rates of pregnancy-induced hypertension, greater likelihood of cesarean delivery, and potential impacts on fetal development. Immune system dysfunction. Visceral fat causes impaired immune response and susceptibility to viral and bacterial infections, slower wound healing, and potential autoimmune complications. Gastrointestinal issues. Visceral fat increases the risk of inflammatory bowel disease as well as higher rates of acid reflux, also known as GERD. Also, greater risk of gallbladder disease and altered gut microbiome composition. Bone health. Visceral fat reduces bone density despite carrying more weight. There is an increased risk of fractures, altered calcium metabolism, and vitamin D deficiency risk. Skin health. Visceral fat increases the risk of certain skin conditions and slower wound healing, as well as higher rates of skin infections and more severe inflammatory skin conditions. As you can see, visceral fat is not just an aesthetic concern. It's a major health risk factor that contributes to a wide range of health conditions and can impair nearly every organ system in the body. Reducing visceral fat is critical to lowering the risk of these diseases and improving overall health and longevity. So what can you do? Focus on strategies that reduce visceral fat, such as improving your diet by reducing refined sugars and processed foods, engaging in regular physical activity, particularly strength training and high-intensity exercise, managing stress, and getting enough sleep. However, if you are like me and doing all of that didn't help, don't despair. Now there is an easy and effective way to reduce the visceral fat in your body. I simply take a simple herbal extract daily, all natural, vegan, and gluten-free. It has been studied for many decades and clinically proven to reduce fat significantly, especially visceral fat. It is not available in stores, so if you are keen to reduce your visceral fat, message me at burnflab@pm.me for how to purchase, or ask the person who shared this with you for more information. And please like and share with your friends and family to spread awareness of the dangers of visceral fat.